Welcome to Sopact. In this new video series and podcast series, we'll be talking about some of the unique challenges that today's organizations are facing to prepare themselves to become AI ready. Now, the foundation of that starts with the good and high quality data collection practices and strategy. Today's topic is how to use longitudinal data collection and analysis. So to get started, we will be inviting Sopac team here. Many of you are aware that AI is changing the world and your organizations, and as an organization leaders, you are very much interested in positioning for AI readiness. Ultimately, how do you prepare yourself? And many of the organizations that we talked to last few months, everyone thinks that data is the foundation. So in this podcast or video series, we'll be talking about some of the important topics regarding data because every organization has a unique need of data. And because of that, our job is to help you highlight some of the complexity into data. To get started, today's topic is about longitudinal data collection and analytics. Now, again, every organization has more than one data challenges. So let's talk about what are challenges many organizations focusing. So to do that, I have invited Sopact team. On my left, Hital who is leading the customer success team with 500,000 hours of advisory experience. Madhu Prabhakar, who's been Chief Product Officer and Technology Officer, and he'll be talking about some of the technology and architecture and implementation issues. Ricardo will be talking about some of the practical use cases, and also he's been also head of business development, and also Laurie, who has been leading product Sopact Sense and other product platform at Sopact altogether. So it's my privilege to get launch of this particular podcast. So with that, let's first start with Laurie. You have been working with many organizations on how they think about proving that change, whether it's a youth program, whether it's a STEM program, whether it's student success. So talk about some of the what is the longitudinal analysis, data collection and analysis, and what are the challenges, obviously, in a traditional way of collecting data?
Well, I think that we have seen a lot in these past 10 years in Sopact, right? And definitely what we see that most of the organizations struggle with when it comes to maybe old technologies. You try to cope and catch up with whatever new technology is coming, and this is now AI, but it could be also data, it could be any sort of technological advancement, right? The thing is that organizations that do not prepare correctly might be trying to catch up forever. So, what we tend to see is that they want to collect data and then they want to use their data, and now they're even trying to bring AI into the equation to try to, I don't know, measure improvement, measure progress for participants of their programs or students that they're working with to improve certain skills. The problem is that this is an end to end process that needs to take place in a very intentional way. And you have to meet certain requirements. Data is not something that you can just improvise, or it cannot be an afterthought. And no matter how good AI gets, it will never fill in the gaps for the planning that didn't take place. So that means having clean data and structured data. AI could probably help you clean data a lot and structure it slightly better. But the part where it definitely will not help us with in the longitudinal analysis or longitudinal studies process is that if you're not collecting it with that purpose in mind, if you just collected data 3 years ago and you say, hey, I have some data laying around there from 3 years ago now, I also collected it yesterday and I could keep collecting that. but you didn't plan this with some longitudinal measurement purpose in mind, you might be missing some key aspects that AI won't really be able to make up for. So maybe one example, and maybe Manju can talk a little bit more about this: unique IDs, the way that we identify the participants of your project, of your training. You really want to be tracking individuals so that you measure their individual progress, and then you can aggregate from that. But if you don't have any way of really measuring individual process, even if you don't know their names or their very personal data, that's not really relevant. The thing is that you are able to match them across different stages in the process.
Yeah, I can definitely
Right.
like
And
talk about one example just to, add on top of what Lore mentioned about this unique IDs. There are so many organizations that we deal with. Very recently, we dealt with one of the organizations where exactly what Lore mentioned had happened. Like they did not collect data from the point of view of longitudinal studies, meaning they had that at the back of their mind, but they didn't take care of certain things, meaning unique IDs, for example. They were not collecting or sort of even trying to manage any sort of unique ID for their participants. What ended up happening because of that is when we started engaging with them and we started having a look at their data, we said, hey, to be able to compare results, we need these unique IDs because in absence of this, we will not be able to make a pre or versus post comparison. And it is only after they were like, okay, maybe we can use birth date and this ID and combine them to make up a unique ID. This is what, this is exactly what Lore is talking about, which is if this has not been factored in right from the beginning, there is no AI process that can just, magically come in and, I don't know, beautifully, clean up all of this data because it cannot make up something that doesn't exist. So to be even ready to harness some of these advanced capabilities that we have, and we see it firsthand. AI has tremendous capabilities, and there is real opportunity for organizations to harness AI, but not without taking care of some of these fundamentals that AI will not magically solve for you. So that is something that needs to be highlighted here.
yeah, so great, Madhu. So I think I understand that many organizations need to intentional about how to think about data first before even preparing for AI. AI can obviously be a great use case and analysis and cleanup and all those things. So we'll go into some of the how things can be done better and faster, and because we've been supporting many of the organizations there. Maybe I'll go through each of you, and maybe you can give all very brief examples of the big pain points, some of the use cases that you have encountered in your work with working with a different perspective. And let's try to broaden the thing because I know, Laurie, recently you have worked with some of the businesses as well. So I would also like to bring out that example. Maybe I start with the Laurie. You can talk about this recent program that we are working in a business and with the organization focusing on disability monitoring.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. When doing remote tracking of patients and individuals with special needs, you really have to keep on top of the data that you're being trusted with. You're also gonna need to be on top of the frequency that you're collecting data to really be able to tell whether you are providing a good service, not only for your business purposes, but as well for the individual that you're working with. Your service is really important to them, to their families. So being able to have a good process for measuring how they're doing, if they are satisfied with the service that you're providing, and not only probably on their own, but how are their families feeling, is a really important part of what you need to think of beforehand when you start to design the data collection process. And let's take once more the example of the unique ID. If you don't have a unique way of identifying individuals and you just maybe collected a sample of of questions before they started working with you, and then you collect some random survey questions after a few months or after a month of working with you. You don't really know who they are. You might say, hey, as Madhu was saying, you might say, we can use their birth dates, maybe we can use some name that they provided. But to be very, very, very practical, right? Let's say exactly what is wrong there. They might have typed their name differently. There might be a typo in their birth date in one of the two touch points. There's absolutely no way to really be able to tell who they are before and after and to match those. And maybe AI can say, hey, I can probably match this person because I think their name is very similar, but we've seen it and it doesn't take that many users for you to be in the situation where you get John Smith and John Smith in like two different John Smiths, right? And then similar birth date, you might say, hey, how likely is that? And it's more likely than we would really like it to be.
So before we go into some of the additional case studies or examples, let's get one thing right. Why do we need to do longitudinal data collection and practices? Obviously, most of the example we have seen in is in improving the impact. And that example obviously comes more from social purpose organizations who get the funding from international or national funder agency, and they want to make sure prove that there is a change that you are occurring into the cohort that they are funding, whether it's a training, whether it's a STEM programs. And that's where it's important to understand in an unbiased way how to how do you see the improvement in the confidence, for example, in the younger generation, for that matter. That's a clear and great use case that we see many organizations applying this technique. Other, which is actually already being doing in a more in the industry, in the businesses. One example, obviously, is on and that happens actually very important because there's a clear ROI associated with that, where let's say I'm already providing certain services to people with disability, and I want to see the outcome of the how those some of the monitoring devices been used and is been used. Is there some defect on the product? Is there an effect on how they have been trained? And we want to understand the acceptance rates and dropout rate essentially over the period of time. And this is another great example of how longitudinal analysis can be very valuable, because without that, you will fall apart in terms of your success of your program. And so that is very important to understand that. Let's talk about some additional use case. Maybe Ricardo, you can talk about from your work in Africa, how an organization, what type of organization you can name it if you have name of, otherwise you can talk about the general problem statement and how they solve the logical analysis.
Thank you, Nimesh. Actually, the challenge took place some years ago, but it happens today in the very same way. I can speak about the situation with a vocational training organization that a lot of centers were being deployed, and the goal was to assess the change that the different participants were subject. So to understand the effectiveness of all that investment, we took the approach of first assessing the social return on investment, but actually then we understood that it would be much easier to assess the impact. And that brought us to longitudinal data. But I think that one of the main challenges had to do with defining a baseline, because we didn't survey the participants before they entered the program. So these two Laura's point in terms of data coming as an afterthought. So ultimately, organizations should be thinking strategically in terms of what data they will be needing to collect and deploy those longitudinal surveys beforehand to define a baseline, and then at a later stage, let's say mid stage, after the execution of the program, and ultimately 6 months after executing the program, to understand the change that those people have been subject, if they got access to jobs, how quality jobs they got, something like this.
Very nice. Hetal, you have been working with many STEM programs and youth programs and even the entrepreneurship program. So give us an example of something that they were able to use them and some of the challenges that obviously they faced. Yeah, right. Thanks
Yeah,
for
I
that.
agree. And if I can jump in, I think that we're not trying to pile on AI, right? We are not anti-AI. We use AI. The thing is, you can use AI in the correct way or in the wrong way. And there are certain aspects of this process where AI definitely helps, but even when a generative AI exists, you cannot really use it to create data that you didn't collect, because that's not really your intention. You want to have metrics that really correspond to your processes and programs and your objectives, and just coming up with data won't really give you the answers that you want. You really wanted the data from the right point in time, from the right person, and in the right shape and form, so you were going to be able to use it.
I think one
No,
So you
point.
can
absolutely.
actually.
And I think, go ahead, Madhu.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to add like the same thing what Laurie you said, right? And until now, the AI has certain models and they've been kind of trained by certain kind of a size of a people or certain demographics and whatnot. And I think this is a separate discussion of bringing in voices of a diverse people in also. And that is why if you're doing or working with a very specific group of people or a region, it's very important to have that data collected and make even the AI rich in some point of the way, right? Because you cannot just compare your data and the insight with whatever existing models are. I mean, those mini models makes more sense as we go further in. Go ahead,
So
Madhu. Sorry.
there are two
Madhu had a
topics that
point
is,
as well.
yeah. Now I think I'll give it to Madhu, and he probably so he promised this whole thing in a much better way. So the two things that I still haven't heard so far, which is really is the role of AI in learning from stakeholders in unbiased way, and most also there are a lot of resistance to collecting data as well that can also be play a big role. Now, as you know, Madhu, there are tools like surveys and forms have been around for ages, and we have seen a huge resistance now in data collection. So, talk a little bit about how some of this thing can be done through automation of some sort and through some form of AI altogether, because ultimately we really want to simplify this whole process for most of the organization, because this is where some of this magic can really be useful. But how do you see this thing evolving from your perspective?
Yeah, I think Unmesh, you're making a good point. Honestly, that's exactly what I was about to talk as well. Earlier, Unmesh, you were asking a question on this new business that that we are engaged with, where we are trying to analyze data, and Lore spoke a bit about that. I really want to talk, answer your question through that perspective, because the difference between an organization not having thought through data collection versus an organization that has thought through, and which was not an afterthought for them, you can clearly see it here. So in this case, I'm talking about this business that that we're dealing with. We have their data. We are trying to help them analyze impact, analyze their data, and give them some results, right? Show them some insights. But the fundamental part here, again, is what Lore mentioned early on, the problem that she was highlighting, which is data collection and how data is collected was not an afterthought for them. Why? Because one, they had taken the time to think through what is that first touch point with all of their customers? How are they going to collect data? How are they going to manage unique IDs? The best thing here was, which I see in very few organizations, even when they did a survey of those customers that they have, they had maintained the same unique ID that they were maintaining across all systems. And Unmesh, this makes a huge difference in terms of, solutioning, because now you are basically, you will not be struggling to match, hey, like, who is this person who gave us this data versus this? Like the problem that Hetal was highlighting earlier, which is some people give data in pre, but they don't give data in post. How do you accurately know that it's the same person who has not answered the post? That's because you are managing those unique IDs. You know this person did not respond in post. So, coming back to your question, Unmesh, on hey, like, what are we thinking in terms of solution? So, on one hand, we've had surveys, and for the longest periods of time, surveys have existed. They've probably existed for more than 100 years. surveys are extremely efficient in terms of the kinds of data that you can collect, what to collect, whom to collect it from, different distribution mechanisms, but they are not particularly helpful when it comes to some of these aspects like managing unique IDs, making sure that you are collecting clean data. Even when you're managing unique IDs, you have to ensure that there's no duplicacy in data. The same person doesn't enter the results twice in pre and twice in post, which makes your analysis difficult. So surveys are not great at that. While they are great at collecting, very varied types of data, if you could say that. On the other hand, you have CRMs that sort of solves some of these problems. Like for example, when there's a first touch point with a CRM, you enter some form. There's a unique ID generated for that person. So CRMs do solve some of those problems, but they are not great at collecting data as surveys are. So I think a hybrid solution that picks the best of both the worlds is sort of the need of the hour to even implement some of these automations that you alluded to just before, which is making sure that the software or solution is nimble enough that even a small organization can adopt. For smaller organizations, it's extremely hard to sort of pick up a CRM, pick up a survey, bring them together, manage all of these IDs. There is a level of technical sophistication that is necessary in order to do this. So I think a solution that is sort of hybrid of both, if you will, which also prepares organizations to leverage AI. Otherwise, what we were talking about before, which Heather and Lore also mentioned, you can't leverage AI without getting these fundamentals right. It's extremely difficult for AI to just make up stuff. That's not the point anyway. AI is great at the second part, maybe even some of the data cleanup. It may help you. Again, not a whole lot if you have too many duplicates. You don't know how those duplicates entered. You are not managing those unique IDs. Even there, you're going to find it extremely hard to clean up data using AI. It's not easy. So you have to get those fundamentals right if you want to harness AI to make life, of the people working within your organization easy.
And talk about maybe Laurie or Madhu, either of you can take on that. There's a one aspect, it's a technical, which you mentioned about managing unique ID, but other is to understand unbiased feedback from the thing, because most people really get it wrong. That essentially they make a very long survey and ask yes or no or one, two, three, four questions, but that ultimately is many of them and tend to be more biased. So this is where how can AI really helpful essentially by getting a more nimble approach, a qualitative quantitative part of it. Here's an example and why that is important even first place to go through that process, because time save or whatever the benefits we are seeing essentially.
I think that's a very important question to answer here. You're absolutely right. A lot of people do resort to a lot of these, selection-based questions, categorical questions, if you will, like yes, no, and some options. While they are extremely, it makes it easy for you to like do the analysis part, but it's not very helpful when it comes to if you're trying to gain some unique insight into your stakeholders' life. That's where I think qualitative data comes into picture that you were talking about, Umesh, which is we are now focusing more on collecting sort of open-ended responses. Think of like more open response from a stakeholder. It could be in the form of text that they enter. It could be in the form of maybe it was an interview where they, narrated a few things. Maybe there was a question answer kind of format. They are all open-ended, meaning there's no options to select. For example, we are having this conversation. There's no selection here. I'm voicing out my opinion. Lore is saying, Hetal and Ricardo, we are all talking. So it's more open. Now, the great part about AI and the advancements that we've seen in AI is that it's extremely good at analyzing these qualitative kind of information, more text, audio, video, etc. Which means organizations now have, like more than ever that they have before, they now have the opportunity to collect unbiased responses in the form of more open natured data, text, audio, video, and they can leverage AI to actually extract insights from that. And I think, Lore, you can definitely talk about the recent example that we've been going through. Lore has done a lot of work over there, where the analysis was more on the qualitative data and the insights that we can generate from that. There is no comparison with the categorical yes and no question that that people may have answered. Over to you, Lore. I mean, I think you can shed some more light on that topic.
And in that example, Laurie, you could see that this is the organization that been collecting data for like that. So tell us about their struggle and what they're really able to uncover that they did not know before, and how is that proved useful in terms of their business ROI perspective.
Yeah, I think that some things that we have been able to positively apply AI to is in these type of very time consuming tasks, or I want to say time consuming. In the best case scenario, organizations were actually using the data that they were collecting, the qualitative data that they were collecting. But we have also seen the entire opposite, right? Like they just realized these would take ages to analyze, and let's just say set an example. They have had one question, one open-ended question in a survey, right? But they have 400 responses, and the team of two people or even one person didn't really have time to go through that one question. They had to take that time to analyze the rest of the questions, and going through that manually, reading all those responses and up with insight from each of those responses, then even trying to measure that became a really time consuming thing in their team. So even by after attempting to do this, they just deprioritize it because it's just a time sink operation, right? So in the end, by implementing AI, what we were able to accomplish was we reduce the time that these tasks take by a lot. We make it a reality that now you can employ this data in a way that you can identify important insight for your organization with context, or just out completely out of any context. That means you can just take the data raw as it is and try to see what common themes are mentioned, or from your own context and your own perspectives, bring in some ideas like, hey, are they mentioning these? Are they mentioning that they don't like our staff? That they don't feel comfortable with discussing specific topics with our staff, right? Or that they have felt really empowered by being able to feel some sort of independence. These are very important topics that when the organization tries to validate by just having quantitative data, you might need to have certain specific and honestly biased questions. Just like, how do you feel? Do you feel confident about having someone checking on you twice or three times a day, right? They are leading questions if you want to obtain the type of insight that you want. But with qualitative data, you're capable of just asking, hey, how do you feel about our service? Type of questions, right? It's very, very open ended. Obviously, if you're thinking of manually analyzing that, that will take ages. So organizations shy away from asking those type of questions. But now it's possible to ask very open ended questions, extract meaningful insight, either what you were looking for or things that you newly discovered, and even quantify that to set as a metric moving forward, so that you keep asking that very open, wide question, and you see, hey, are people still mentioning that they feel uncomfortable with our staff after the changes that we have put in place, right? Or are they still saying that they feel empowered by being able to become more independent just by having our staff check in twice or three times a day? This becomes a process that you can implement and that you can actually take some metrics, targets, improve your business. So I think that's one of the greatest values that we have used AI for.
I think we
Fantastic.
can
This was
chime in a little bit, I think, over the same thing, Ricardo and I. I think, Ricardo, I'm sure you seen the same example when we work with this accelerator come fund, right? There's actually they already know through the existing research that there are certain challenges, like an ecosystem challenges that they know by the region, like what this new fund, female fund managers would be experiencing. But that's not enough actually, because when you are working with a specific group of people in a specific region, by asking this qualitative question at a several different points, they are learning some new challenges emerging, which the existing research of an ecosystem is not like picking up. But this is something that they're saying that what keeps them behind is just coming up with a networking again and again, right? Like introduction to new LPs or, bringing them to the networking events, and that is something that ecosystem was not picking up. They were just keep seeing probably that, hey, they don't have a lead funder, and that's one of the major challenges. Or being a female, they're not like a people are not taking enough risk with them. But if they have an opportunity to be providing a networking events, that increases their success of building a fund. And I think Ricardo can chime in. I think how useful that the data point it is for them, right?
Yeah, the same way, we need to understand how this analysis, qualitative data analysis, is being done today. Because without AI, it's a cumbersome process, as Laurie has mentioned, but ultimately there are tools available that require users to go one by one on those responses and codify, categorize those responses into things. Analyze that. Imagine that you have a team that is large enough or more than one person to aggregate all that data comes at a very big challenge, because categories are created depending on those responses. Then each person categorizes in different ways. So AI has the means to make it much more objective. And this improves the analysis and gives access to much better quality of data. Over to you, Mesh.
such a discussion today, and I think we brought out many important topics. I mean, one thing that I would like to summarize here is that the AI is real and the value is real, but AI by itself is not the answer to many things. There's a lot of business process improvement you can do and return on investment you can have, but you need to have very strategic thinking. And two things that I can see from this some discussion today is number one, technically, it's important to make sure you think through end-to-end process in terms of how you collect the data and embed the right type of data collection, a unique ID, so that you can go back to the same stakeholder again and again and again. Second one is that there's a large amount of organization who's leaving their most asset of data collection on the table by not analyzing qualitative data and by leveraging some of the AI aspect in the right way and then applying qualitative and quantitative together in a very smart way can give you immense amount of insight that is just not possible before. So I hope this was valuable to you all, and we'd love to hear back from you. You can put in the comments some of the topics that you would like to hear back. But this is the channel again. It's about how to use right good design techniques into your before you're applying it to AI. So see you in the next video, next podcast, and I will say goodbye to for now. Thank you.
Thanks.